and then I burned it, and then was I to talk about the Philippines too?
Yes,
Took
please.
a long time to get there, didn't it?
No, that's all right. We got time. We have time for Philippines.
Okay. He's been coaching me a lot on this thing and watching some of the other guys having their fun up here too. But anyway, I burnt the second, and I was probably down 500, 400 feet, something like that. And I actually, as I was pulling out, could see the hole that was coming from the oil tank, that something came from underneath and hit the oil tank. And I knew I had it immediately. There's nothing, you can not know from something like that. It was coming through the bottom and all. And but anyway, I pulled back up to about 900 feet, and the air intelligence people had told us, and I had known. Actually, I was talking to one of them just the night before, and it bothered me a little bit because he told me there was the next time we'd see Navy planes there would be an attack or a landing there somewhere. He didn't know where. Didn't tell me anyway. If he did know, I don't think he knew. But anyway, I pull up, but he had told me, don't head back in the direction across the lowlands there in central Luzon, right by Clarkfield area. Head west. And we'd get into the hills, and the guerrillas would take you over and meet a submarine, and it would rescue you. I found out later that submarine had been sunk by a Japanese submarine, so thank God wasn't taken up that way. But anyway, what I had done, I was pulling up, and then I headed over, and I could see my oil pressure gauge just going slowly down. And it was one of those feelings that you have to think of these things before. I'd had one parachute jump stateside back before we ever went out or ever got a squadron, and some dumbhead didn't know how to do a crossover or something, and he came down on my tail. And the only good part about that, and then I had a passenger, I had a sailor, a white hat. They just liked to bum rides with us, and SNJs, we were just, that's all we had to fly at that time out in San Diego and over by, but anyway, the main thing is, my tail was hit, and I didn't know how bad it was that time, and I pulled up, and I had no choice. I still couldn't control the plane from going into a spiral, and so I yelled on a radio. I told him to jump, and I'll never forget the sound of his voice. It went up a couple of octaves, and he said, "Jump," one of those type of things. And I said, "Yeah, I'll get the hell out of there." and so he got out okay. He was ready to go up later on and ride back again, so he had the spirit. But that was his first airplane ride, his very first airplane ride. I shake my head just thinking about it. But the main thing there, that one, I finally realized I was going to be a hero and bring the plane back, and I tried to bring it back, and I found out I was getting nowhere, and I couldn't hold it. So I reached over to unfasten my seatbelt to let go, get out myself. All of a sudden, the plane went into an inverted spin and threw me out, and I went head over heels. And I finally got my hand over to the ripcord, and it opened. My chute went once and a half, and it went in a lemon tree. Lemon Grove, California, down near San Diego. And I had to do what came natural with me. I picked the biggest lemon out of that tree, and I brought it back, and I gave it to my friend who got my tail off. But anyway, that was my first parachute jump. But anyway, now that we got back on the carrier, or I'm off the carrier, aren't I? But anyway, I'm on the Philippines, coming down, and I would say that by the time my chute opened, it was probably maybe 300-400 feet, because the plane only got up to about 900 feet, and it was going down, but I trimmed it. And believe me, when I climbed out of the plane, or before I did, I got to release the canopy, and I had a chance later on to meet the man that was my wingman later at one of the reunions. And I said, "How did it look from your side, from your view?" And you get a different perspective on how things look on something like that. But anyway, this time I pulled I trimmed the plane up so it would fly hands off. I reached in, got all the stuff, ripped stuff, got rid of it, so in case of something happening, it wouldn't be too serious or anything turned over to the enemy. But And then I waited until the plane was starting to feel funny and ready to fall off. And so I climbed out like they do in the movies, you know. They used to climb out on the wing of the plane, you know, and the scarf would go fleeting out on the side. Well, anyway, I'm there holding to the side of the cockpit on the trailing edge of the wing right alongside of the cockpit, waiting what seemed like a long time. I probably was just a matter of a few seconds, but it got me, frankly, a little more into the area away from the Japanese control, because they had outposts a lot of different places right by Clark Field area. And I finally let go, and my mind was made up on what I was going to do. And I raised my hand to avoid the tail, the empennage, as I let go, but I wasn't even close to that. I mean, so any of you have to go, and it may not hit the tail if you're going, plane's just doing that, it's not going too fast. But anyway, I let go, and I'm coming down, and I pull my ripcord, and I remember the first thought that crossed my mind, Alex, what have you gotten yourself into this time, you know? And so anyway, I'm coming down, and I had to swing the risers, but I never got the risers completely over to hit going forward. I'll admit I didn't learn any lesson the first time because I was in the trees, so I didn't have to worry about too much on any being blown or coming out. Anyway, I hit, and I rolled on over a little bit, and I could see people running towards me. Well, put yourself in my parachute. I was going to say put yourself in my parachute. In my shoes at the time, you have to, believe me, nobody thinks he's going to get shot down. But they were getting good. They were getting a lot of real good on their anti-aircraft fire. But I had my mind made up on there that if it was enemy, it was the enemy at all. And I had actually that I was not going to get captured. I knew what they had done to us, a lot of our guys, but some of our guys, particularly at Saipan, where they gouge their eyes out and cut off their ears and stuff that. And so I had my 45 out, and I'm waiting to recognize, and you have to make split decisions on there, but I thought I'd take a few of them with me if they're going to get me. But the way they came over, and they said, Filipino, no shoot, no shoot. And so, again, you're half undecided, but you have to go with the stream, whatever it was. So anyway, they come over, they get me out of my oil slick suit and my parachute, and put a straw hat on my head and a sports shirt and a pair of slacks. I could only button, there were ladies in the group, I could only button the bottom 2 buttons. But I got the mayor's pants later on. He was a little taller. But anyway, I get taken. They said, we go. And so we get into a little village, and children, women, loose people around on the thing, and they get a little small Negrito Filipino. He's probably about 6 years old or so, very low to the ground, and we're trucking along and walking along, Scout's pace, 50 run, 50 walk, and you have to realize fighter pilots don't walk too much. They walk across the street from the hangar over to the BOQ or something like that. But I never was as tired as I was that night. But anyway, I got to tell you that they picked me up every once in a while. They'd pick me up and carry me about 10 feet and put me down again. And after the second time, I said, "What's going on here?" And they showed me. They showed me what they had. The little boy could spot the trail, and there was a bamboo trap, and if you tripped that, it would rip the calf of your leg off. But boy, believe me, I let them pick me up every time they wanted to after that. But another funny thing, some of you older timers over here might remember this on a thing. What really relaxed me before we even got taken up into the hills, up in the Mount Pinatubo area, incidentally. That's where the earthquake came on later on. Remember the thing over by, messed up Clark Field completely and closed it down? But that's where the camp was in the back in that area. But what really relaxed me a little bit was when the 2 of the younger guerrillas that were part of our group came up, each of them had a question. And the first one's question was Madeline Carroll married the second time? They were movie fans, you wouldn't believe it. Whether Madeline Carroll was married the second time, and whether Diana Durbin had any children yet. Those were the first two questions I got asked. And so I relaxed, and we got up in there, and I could. He signaled by putting this, I'm supposed to cut it short a little bit. But what happened after that is something that right up the national highway, and being attacked by another guerrilla group, and meeting an American woman married to a Filipino, and the mayor of the town, and then the shots ring out. I mean, and finding myself after rendezvousing with the North Tarlac group. They had, the way things were there, the Filipinos, I was told by the baton survivor that was the head of the camp. Incidentally, he made me an honorary brevet major. I didn't know what it meant, and I had to ask a Marine later on, and I'm not sure he knew what a brevet major was, but I didn't get paid for it, but I was only a lieutenant, a full lieutenant by that time. But anyway, I found myself, after we rendezvoused with this other group, on the side of a river, laying on my stomach with a rifle, waiting for a Japanese group to come across the river, which was reported, and there was a signal, 7, and if the other guy didn't say 11, you start shooting, But to find myself on my stomach lying on there, and I thought to myself, what's a good fighter pilot doing on his stomach in this godforsaken country? It's got a weird feeling, but it's true. It's true. But we went right up the National Highway, met an outpost. There was a guy about 6'8". It was a National Guard outfit from Illinois, and they found out that I was from the greater Chicago area, northwest Indiana, actually. And he didn't know what to do with us as we were coming out, but there was a bugler, there was a Filipino flag, an American flag, and a guerrilla flag, 3, and then 12 of us, chosen few, on horseback. Well, I forgot to tell you about the horse that I had to ride a couple of nights before that, and he kept turning around trying to bite me. And their horses aren't very big. But this particular one, and he got the best of me. I just kicked him a little bit, and we were riding all night long to get around to join and go into the other camp, and we got about 200 yards from the entrance to their camp, and that horse just laid down, looked up at me, and almost like saying, type. But I don't know. I could tell more on that. Do you have any more questions?
No, sir. You made it out of the jungle, and you'll see at the grad ball, if you see the video, you see him. He was sporting a beard and carrying a Japanese machete. And we appreciate everything. I just want to let the class know that when I concluded my final interview with him for my research paper, I was complimenting on his service to the country, and he responded back, and he was actually responding back to all of us, and he said we would have done the same. And I just want to say, sir, we salute you for your contributions to the generation of greatness, your superb aviation skills, and lastly, your utter humility. Thank you, sir. On behalf of the class of 2004 student and faculties of ACSC, please accept this mug on our behalf.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. What if I told you it was misspelled?
I know, exactly.
Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham is an icon of American fighter aviation. Born on December 8, 1941, the first full day of World War II, he would later become a warrior over the skies of Vietnam. Congressman Cunningham entered U.S. Navy pilot training in 1966 and was selected to fly the hottest aircraft in the Navy's inventory, the F-4 Phantom II. On his second cruise, he would become the first ace of the Vietnam War and destroyed his first 3 North Vietnamese MiGs on the same day, an accomplishment for which he was awarded the Navy Cross. He later commanded the U.S. Navy's Adversary Squadron at its fighter weapons school, better known as Top Gun, and in fact would become the inspiration for the main character portrayed by Tom Cruise in a certain movie you may have seen back in the 1980s. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the first ace of the Vietnam War, United States Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham. Sir, I just have a couple of questions to kick things off. I'd like to ask you what you really did in Vietnam, and also if you could comment on who was the most dangerous adversary, the North Vietnamese Air Force or House Democrats?
Well, actually, on the USS Constellation, we cut off this big tub, and we brought a bunch of monkeys in from the Philippines, and we got them to piss in this thing. We bottled it, and we called it Pearl Beer. We even got the Air Force to pay 10 cents a bottle for that shit.
Well, as much as I'd like to keep things going in this vein, we have to attempt to impart knowledge here. So I'll ask you.
No, I do think, and I do want to comment on your second question, because I think it's important, especially for this class. I think the most dangerous people that we faced were the Jane Fondas, the Tom Haydens, the Senator Jim, Kerrys. In 1971, he testified before the Senate and called all of us war criminals as bad as Genghis Khan. I remember how that hurt us. And they comment about his war record. Well, let me tell you something. I talked to the doctor that had his third Purple Heart. Senator Kerry then, wasn't Senator Kerry then, John Kerry came in, had like a splinter in his arm, and the doc said, "Why are you here?" And he says, "Well, I've got this wound." He had fired a rocket-propelled grenade, his own, hit some rocks, came back, had a little piece of shrapnel was sticking out of his arm, about the size of a thorn. And the doc said, "Why don't you pull it out?" He says, "No, I want it documented. You pull it out." And that was his third Silver Star, so he could, or his third Purple Heart, so he could get out of there in 4 months. He left us behind, guys.
Well, I know we had spoken, you're unique among the Eagles that we have this year in that you have a historical perspective to bring, but you also have a unique perspective being involved in current defense issues, current events in Iraq, those sorts of things. I was wondering if you had any comments on that.
I think, I know we're supposed to talk airplanes here, but it's also about leadership. We had the recent problem with the prisons. And I did a couple things in the squadron when I took place. The chain of command is very, very important. Without it, your whole unit goes to pot. But when I took over as CO of the squadron, I said there was 4 things in which you could bypass the division chief, the division officer, the department head, the command master chief, the executive officer, and walk right through my office. One of those was any known racial things that happened in the squadron, because I saw an aircraft carrier diminished because of racial problems. It could destroy your unit. The second was any known sexual abuse or child abuse, and we had a problem in the military with guys coming back with child abuse. The one that I think was most important was I said, if there's anything that will denigrate the squadron, the Navy, or the United States of America, you bypass all of those people, walk right through my door and come in. And in the 3 years that I had the squadron, I saw every one of those 4 happen. and they were taken care of. I didn't want to wait a week or 2 weeks or even a month for an investigation to take place. I wanted to know about it now to head it off. I don't think that leadership was available in that prison system all the way down. And I think if they'd had a sit-down meeting with their squadron, with the unit there, that wouldn't have happened, and it boiled down to leadership.
Yes, sir. All right, sir, can we talk about airplanes now?
Airplanes.
All right.
And Pearl beer.
And Pearl beer. Some of the challenges that you faced flying the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam, especially the changes in the air defense makeup of Vietnam between your first and second cruise. We talked about that earlier. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what it was like to employ the F-4 essentially on a mission that wasn't really designed for, and also the influence of, I know it wasn't Top Gun yet, but the training that you'd received, adversary training, and how that helped you.
I'm alive today because of the training, the leadership that we had in our squadron with our CO or XO. They believed in fighting anything that had wings and a tail on it, and that before I met my first MiG, I had a whole host of training missions, air-to-air combat type training. And with the Phantom, when it started off, the Air Force and the Navy didn't fare very well in early stages. And we weren't supposed to be fighting tight-turning MiGs. After Korea, the quote, leadership said there weren't going to be any more dogfights, that we're only going to see Russian bombers coming across at about 0.9 Mach. And it's going to be head-on. So we only had a Sparrow, which was very ineffective. The Sidewinder was not very good. And we got ourselves in a lot of trouble in Vietnam. There was a guy named Captain Frank Alt that knew he wasn't going to make Admiral, that they tasked to do a report. They found out that our Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles were low. Matter of fact, the kill probability for Air Force and Navy in Vietnam Sparrow was 7%. Most people don't know that. And that our fighter pilots were trained as interceptor pilots, not dogfights. And when they were getting in these tight turns, they were losing. So I was very fortunate when I graduated from flight school in San Diego at NAS Miramar, it's now the Marine Corps base, that I got to go to Top Gun as a stash because the Enterprise came back. They had a big fire. And I was going to go to a squadron that later had to go clear back over on the East Coast. And I got to fly in the back seat of A4 Skyhawks with, quote, guys that had flown in Korea and a lot of combat. So I really learned about air-to-air tactics flying with the guys that were flying the bad guy airplanes, looking and seeing the mistakes in the Phantoms and the F-8s and so on. So when I jumped in my first squadron, I had quite a bit of experience, more so I think than the guys that had actually flown a tour over there, because if you remember, President Johnson had terminated the bombing in 1968, and the guys that had just gotten back in 69, 70 hadn't seen any real MiG fights.
How did that play out? Probably your most memorable day in Vietnam, probably May 10th, 1972, when you had essentially completed your status as an ace. You were shot down in that day. If you could maybe tell us about the events of that day and also talk a bit about, again, how that Top Gun training or that adversary training played out.
Well, I'll tell you about the day, the second time I got shot down. I came back to the States, and I was in New York City and on the Barbara Walters show, and on with Johnny Carson and a whole bunch of guys. And I came back on the airlines, and then they call them stewardesses instead of flight attendants. And I remember getting back on the airplane, and the flight attendant looked at me and she said, "You went to the University of Missouri, didn't you?" And I remember thinking, she must have seen me on TV. She knows who I am. And I thought I was going to get lucky and went back and sat in my seat, and I waited the whole flight for her to come back and sit down and ask me to go out when we got back to Washington. And she never did, and I got off the airplane. I had my two little bags, and I stopped, and she was a nice-looking lady, and I remember thinking, well, you know, you saw me on TV? And she says, no. I said, well, you saw me on Barbara Walters' show. And she said, no. And Johnny Carson? No. And I said, how did you know I went to University of Missouri? And she says, I saw it on your ring when you're picking your nose. That one I really died.
Not sure I know where to go next. But how about May 10th? How about that?
If I could, I'd like to go back on the first kill before we hit May 10th, because I think there's another important lesson. And I've been here before and I've told this story, but I think it's probably these young Turks out here, men and women, that you're going in, you're going to be taking over squadrons or units and so on. And I like to think about a teamwork aspect. When I shot down my first MiG, we came back aboard the USS Constellation, and the reason it was significant is that no MiG had been shot down except for one in the Navy since 1968, when they terminated the bombing of the North. When I landed on the Connie, it was a big deal. All 5,000 guys came up on the flight deck, the snipes that shovel coal, 7 layers down, you don't see for all that time. We're up there and they're yelling and cheering, and they're coming around, and you're just taxiing the airplane, trying to fold the wings, get the ejection seat pins in, all those switches safed. And I pulled over to the elevator and I looked, and there was Admiral Hutch Cooper, who was the commander of Task Force 77. Captain James D. Ward was skipper of the Connie, my skipper, and everybody, and they were all sitting there cheering. My plane captain, Willie White, broke through the crowd. He knocked over Admiral Cooper. You don't do that. In his excitement, he ran under the turkey feathers, jumped up on the port wing. That's a left wing for you Air Force pukes. Jumped up on the port wing, came down the turtleback, and I'm trying to get the ejection seat pin in, and he grabbed me by the arm, John, and he said, Lieutenant Cunningham, we got our MiG today, didn't we? And what was Willie trying to tell me? That he, like 5,000 guys on that carrier, felt that they were part of that team. That from Ramirez, that used to fix my double egg, double cheese, double fry burger at night, to the guys that slapped the missiles up, to everything, that those kids that you work with feel that they are part of that team, especially if you make them feel that way. And I've seen plane captains cry when the pilots didn't come back. And that's the attitude. And so if you ever forget that bond, if you ever forget that relationship, I think you're losing something. Go down and have a cup of coffee with them when they're working on your airplanes, or if you're in other phases other than aviation. But sit down with them. You need to keep an edge. You can't be a good old boy with them, but you need to let them know you respect them, that you care, and that what they do is important. 10 minutes. I will get to it. Actually, I wasn't on the flight schedule. I'd had 2 MiG kills at that time, and they were going on a strike just south of Hanoi called the Hai Duong Railroad Yard. I went back to Vietnam just a few years ago, and I saw that railroad yard. They still haven't fixed it up. It's still a hole there. But I got up and I saw the flight schedule, where they were going, right down in the middle of all of Phu Quyen and Kep and Yen Bai and all of the MiG bases.